Hashtag the abandoned bride who found home in the snow. Daddy, she looks like Mommy. Those 5 words hit Ezra Cole like a gunshot to the chest. His hands tightened on the reins as the horses slowed without him even commanding them to stop. For one impossible heartbeat, the entire world stopped moving. Snow hung suspended in the freezing air, breath caught in his lungs like ice. Ezra didn't turn right away because he already knew what would happen if he did. He'd spent 3 long years learning how to keep moving forward, how to survive each day without looking back. But then his daughter's small voice broke through his defenses, and he looked. What he saw made every wall he carefully built around his heart begin to crack. A woman stood completely alone on the platform at Red Hollow Station, her back bent slightly against the brutal Montana cold. She wore a wedding dress that had been ruined by snow and soot, the white fabric turned gray and dingy, the hem soaked completely through with frozen slush. Her shoulders trembled, not from the wind cutting across the empty plains, but from quiet, breaking sobs that shook her entire frame. She looked impossibly small against the vast Montana winter stretching endlessly in every direction, like something the world had simply forgotten to protect. Ezra should have driven on. He knew that with every fiber of his being. He had spent 3 agonizing years learning exactly how to drive on past pain, past memory, past anything that threatened to pull him back into the darkness he'd barely survived. Winter had come early to Montana Territory in 1884, the kind of winter that didn't ask permission before burying everything under feet of unforgiving snow. The brutal cold buried the railroad tracks almost daily. Trains screamed through the frozen plains hours late, if they managed to come at all. Red Hollow Station was nothing more than a weathered platform, a dilapidated shack, and the kind of oppressive silence that made lonely thoughts echo louder than any scream. The woman's name was Lillian Moore, though no one at that desolate station knew it yet. She stood exactly where the eastbound train had abandoned her just minutes before, watching smoke dissolve into the steel-colored sky like her dreams evaporating into nothing. In her gloved hand she clutched a return ticket she hadn't asked for, a cruel consolation prize. In her other hand, a worn carpet bag held everything she owned and everything she had already lost. The wedding dress had taken 3 months to sew by candlelight, each stitch made with pricked fingers and hope woven into every seam. 4 days ago, the man she was supposed to marry had married someone else instead, leaving her stranded and humiliated. Lillian stared at the snow gathering at her feet, unable to make herself move even 1 step. The cold had worked its way deep into her bones, making even the simplest thought feel impossibly heavy. The station master had offered directions to a boarding house 2 miles away through the snow. She hadn't answered him because walking felt completely impossible in that moment. Tomorrow felt even worse. Ezra watched her from his wagon, his jaw tight with tension, his heart locked safely behind walls he had sworn would never, ever fall again. Beside him, his 4-year-old daughter Anna clutched her blanket with small fists, her blue eyes fixed intently on the woman in the destroyed dress standing alone in the snow. "She smells sad," Anna whispered with the strange wisdom children sometimes possess. "Like Mommy did when she stopped singing." Ezra flinched hard at those words. He wrapped the reins deliberately around the brake, and the wagon came to a complete stop. With that simple action, the carefully controlled life Ezra Cole had been barely holding together for 3 years began to crack wide open. He climbed down from the wagon slowly, moving as if any sudden motion might shatter what little balance and control he had left. Snow crunched loudly beneath his boots in the oppressive silence. The woman didn't look up when he stopped a respectful few paces away from her. Her face was turned slightly aside, her lashes clumped together with frozen tears, her cheeks pale and raw from prolonged exposure to the brutal cold. "You all right, miss?" he asked carefully. His voice sounded wrong even to his own ears, too rough and unused to gentle conversation after years of deliberate silence. She tried to answer him. Whatever word she desperately reached for never made it past her constricted throat. She shook her head once in a small, utterly defeated motion that communicated more than any speech ever could have. Ezra followed her gaze downward and took in the full picture. The ruined wedding dress, the carpet bag clutching everything she owned, the return ticket clenched so tightly in her hand that her knuckles had gone completely white. Understanding landed heavy and undeniable in his chest. "You waiting on someone?" he asked, though he already suspected the devastating answer. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "No one's coming for me." Behind him, Anna shifted restlessly on the wagon seat, her small boots dangling, her eyes far too old and knowing for a child of only 4 years. Ezra felt her watching him intently, felt the weight of an impossible promise he'd made long ago pressing hard against his ribs like a physical force. The wind cut sharper across the empty platform. Snow continued creeping into the folds of the woman's destroyed dress, melting against her frozen skin. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Ezra saw the brutal truth of her situation then with perfect clarity. She wasn't choosing to stay standing there on that platform. Her body had simply run completely out of strength to do anything else. "There's a boarding house," he said, though he already knew what her answer would be. "In town," she replied distantly. "I know about it." But she didn't move even an inch. Ezra exhaled slowly through his nose, controlled and deliberate. He turned back to his wagon and lifted his heavy coat from the seat. It was thick wool, still warm from his own body heat. He stepped close to her again, close enough to smell coal smoke and faded lavender clinging to her ruined dress, and settled the coat around her trembling shoulders before she could even think to protest his kindness. "There," he said quietly, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. "Don't fight it." "I can't take this," she murmured weakly. "You'll freeze out here without it." "I'm used to the cold," he replied simply. Her fingers curled into the warm coat without her permission, like they belonged there, and had been searching for exactly this refuge. Ezra saw the way relief broke through her exhaustion like sunlight through storm clouds, and something in him twisted hard and sharp. "What's your name?" he asked after a moment. "Lillian," she said, her voice steadier now. "Lillian Moore." He nodded once. "Ezra Cole. That's my daughter Anna up there." Anna gave a solemn little wave from her perch on the wagon seat. "Hello," she said seriously. Lillian's mouth trembled as she tried to smile back and failed completely. "We've got a ranch about an hour west of here," Ezra said, each word costing him something he couldn't name. "There's a fire burning. Hot food ready. You can warm yourself properly. In the morning, I'll take you wherever you need to go, I promise." She hesitated, pride flickering briefly in her eyes before dying completely. "I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted, the words breaking something inside her. Ezra held out his arm steady and sure. "Then you won't stand freezing in this cold," he replied with quiet conviction. And Lillian Moore, abandoned bride with nowhere left to fall, and no one left to catch her, took his offered arm. The wagon rolled away from Red Hollow Station without any ceremony whatsoever. No one waved goodbye. No one called out. The howling wind swallowed that desolate place as if it had never mattered at all to anyone. Lillian sat stiffly on the bench beside Ezra, his coat pulled tight around her shaking shoulders. It smelled distinctly of wood smoke and worn leather and clean, cold mountain air. Beside her, Anna leaned close without hesitation, her small body radiating precious warmth through layers of wool. "You're really a bride?" Anna asked softly, careful and gentle, like she already knew the answer might hurt. "I was supposed to be," Lillian said, her voice sounding far away like it belonged to someone else entirely. "Things changed at the last moment." Anna thought seriously about that revelation for a long, quiet moment. That's really sad, she decided finally. I'm very sorry that happened to you. Thank you, Lillian said, genuinely surprised by how much those simple words of kindness helped ease the crushing weight in her chest. Ezra kept his eyes fixed firmly on the barely visible trail ahead, his jaw set in concentration. The road was nothing more than two narrow ruts cut through deep snow, barely visible as daylight faded rapidly into darkness. He didn't speak at all. Silence had become his safest, most reliable habit over 3 long years of grief. The cold deepened steadily as the sky darkened overhead. Stars began to prick through the heavy clouds one by one, sharp and impossibly distant. Lillian's hands continued shaking despite the warm coat wrapped around her. The external warmth hadn't reached her frozen bones yet, hadn't touched the cold that lived deeper inside her heart. How long ago? She asked suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. Ezra didn't answer at first, then spoke so quietly she almost missed it. 3 years now. She didn't need to ask what terrible thing he meant. The way his shoulders locked up told her more than enough about his loss. I'm sorry for what you've been through, she said gently. So is everyone who knows, he replied, not unkindly but with absolute finality that closed the subject. Anna's small head drooped heavily against Lillian's arm as exhaustion finally caught up with the child. The wagon rocked gently over the uneven trail, and before long Anna's breathing slowed into the deep rhythm of sleep. Lillian shifted very carefully, letting the child rest more comfortably against her, afraid to move too much in case she disturbed the fragile trust forming between them, like the first ice on a winter pond. Warm lights appeared ahead in the darkness, cutting through the night. A large barn came into view first, then a low ranch house dark against the endless snow except for a single window glowing warm and golden like a beacon. Ezra pulled the wagon to a stop and carefully set the brake with practiced efficiency. I'll see to the horses, he said quietly. You take Anna inside where it's warm. Fire's probably burned down low. There's wood stacked right by the hearth. He lifted Anna down from the wagon first with gentle hands, then turned his attention to Lillian. His large hands found her waist steady and absolutely sure, and he lowered her to the snow-covered ground as if she weighed nothing at all. For one brief, electric moment, they stood close enough for her to see the deep lines etched into his weathered face. Grief lived permanently in those lines, carved deep, but so did something else she recognized. Pure endurance. The house was small, but solidly built against the harsh elements. Inside, the fire crackled weakly in the hearth, just as Ezra had predicted. Lillian fed its split wood until flames finally caught and spread eagerly, consuming the dry fuel. Warmth bloomed through the small space almost painfully against her frozen skin. She set water to heat on the stove, found coffee stored by the cooking area, and moved without conscious thought. Physical work steadied her frayed nerves and gave her racing mind something concrete to focus on besides everything she'd lost. Anna stirred from sleep and smiled drowsily up at her. Daddy keeps the house nice, she murmured with childish pride. Mostly anyway. Lillian smiled back genuinely, something fragile and real forming unexpectedly in her chest. For the first time since that train had abandoned her on a frozen platform, she didn't feel like she was slowly disappearing from existence. Ezra came inside bringing the sharp smell of fresh snow and horses clinging to his clothes. He stamped his boots clean by the door, then stopped completely when he saw the fire burning strong and warm, and Anna half asleep in the wooden chair wrapped securely in Lillian's arms. For a long moment, he just stood there motionless. Something flickered across his guarded face. Surprise, perhaps, or something that looked closer to pain. Water's heating on the stove, Lillian said softly into the charged silence. I made coffee. I hope that's all right with you. It's fine, he answered, his voice rougher and more emotional than he'd meant it to be. He shrugged carefully out of his coat and hung it on a peg by the door, deliberately not looking directly at her. Without the heavy coat, the brutal cold seemed not to touch him at all, as if he'd become immune to feeling it years ago. The days that followed moved like a dream Lillian was afraid to wake from. She helped with chores, cooked meals, mended clothes torn by hard ranch work. Anna followed her everywhere, with the desperate devotion of a child who'd lost too much already. Ezra watched from careful distances, his expression unreadable, as if he were trying to solve an impossible equation. 2 weeks passed before he spoke the words that would change everything between them. "I enjoyed having you here," he said one evening by the fire, his voice low and uncertain. Lillian met his eyes, and saw fear there, and hope, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name yet. "I enjoyed being here," she replied honestly. "More than I ever thought possible." Outside, snow continued falling soft and steady, but this time it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the very beginning of something neither of them had been brave enough to believe they deserved, something worth fighting for, something that might finally heal the wounds they'd both been carrying alone for far too long.